Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. That's my cue. Hello, everyone, and welcome, bem-vindo, from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Tony Preston, and I am the UK Department for International Trade's Director for Clean Growth and Energy Transition in Latin America and the Caribbean, based in beautiful Rio de Janeiro. It's a great pleasure for me to be opening this event today on offshore wind. And it really couldn't be happening at a more opportune moment. I say this because next week, the UK will host COP26, and we want to use the opportunity of this global gathering in Glasgow to drive international cooperation on clean energy, to lower emissions, to create jobs, to provide affordable energy, and to stimulate a clean economic recovery. And offshore wind is going to be central to this agenda. The UK is the world leader in offshore wind. It currently accounts for around 10% of the electricity in British homes, and our growth targets are very ambitious. In November of last year, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution in the UK. And the growth of offshore wind is one of the priority areas of this plan. The UK's goal is to quadruple the current offshore wind power generation by 2030, reaching 40 gigawatts. And this is a capacity that will be able to supply all British homes with electricity. This plan also foresees the creation of 60,000 new jobs in the sector. I believe that this sector will also play a prominent role in the diversification of the electricity sector and the growth of the Brazilian economy in the future. So I am very pleased to see that the private sector has taken a leading role in this agenda in Brazil. There are already around 24 requests for environmental licensing with IBAMA for the construction of wind farms in different parts of Brazil. Today, we will see presentations that will give us a good, clear indication of how the private sector here is preparing to develop the sector in Brazil. The moderation will be made by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Fabio Caldas, President of the British Chamber of Commerce in Rio, whom I thank for the partnership today and across a range of other issues too. I would also like to thank our speakers from the UK Government's Prosperity Programme, UK Export Finance, the Ocean Winds Consortium, Enterprise Energy, and Wood for their participation. The British government has been collaborating with the Brazilian government in the construction of a regulation for the offshore wind sector for some time now. Both the UK government's Prosperity Programme and the Department for International Trade have led several initiatives to share international experience in offshore wind development. And we are confident that this sector will be booming in Brazil in the near future. Thank you for your presence, and I wish you a great event. I will now hand over to Fabio with a brief introduction. Fabio Caldas is the president of the Rio de Janeiro branch of the British Chamber of Commerce, or BritCham. He is also founder of the Lightsaber Consultancy, which is focused on institutional relations, non-technical risks, and communications. Fabio worked for 25 years for Shell in Brazil, acting as External Relations Director for Latin America. He was then Director of Institutional Relations and Communications at CPFL before founding Lightsaber. Fabio has been recognized as one of the top 10 communicators of the year by Abrage, which is the Brazilian Association for Business Communication. So we will be in excellent hands for the rest of the webinar. Fabio, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tony, for that. And I would like to thank the UK government for the invitation, to moderate this webinar, which I'm sure is going to be fascinating, on how the private sector is positioning itself for the future offshore wind market in Brazil. So I'm going to speak a bit about Bridgend here. The mission statement is to be the reference of the UK-Brazil business community, providing a forum to foster bilateral trade, investment, service, and relations. But I like to summarize it in the following way. You know, if you want to make business with anything related to the interface Brazil and UK, just stop by, get in touch also with Bridgend, always, right? That's the idea of this mission statement. We have offices in Rio, São Paulo, Paraná, and Minas Gerais. And the membership, you know, very high level networking with high level decision-making executives in Brazil and the UK. We have a number of committees, discussion groups, and events. They cover practically all key business sectors in Brazil. So several fronts and opportunities, I'm sure, that will come up for your company. And to learn more about each of these committees, of these activities, please just visit the British Chamber's website at www.britcham.com.br. The Chamber has undergone unprecedented growth in the recent times, you know, and that highlights the value that we add to our members, you know, growing a lot. And one of the reasons is this very strong partnership with the UK government that we have here, unprecedented as well. I've been in the chamber for some time. For example, tomorrow, Tiago Barral, the president of the Brazilian Planning Bureau, is going to be speaking about the energy sector in Brazil and the planning. Well, now the thanks. Thank to your presence here, to the audience, to Bruno Marcondes, he's my VP at Rio de Janeiro branch of Bridgend. Thank you, Bruno, for helping me to lead. Renato Cordeiro is a very liked person to me for the partnership in leading the Energy Committee. He's also the British government. To the DIT's renewable energy team, Flávia, Silvia, Laura, and João. João is this nasal way to speak John in Portuguese. And also to the Bridgend staff, Fabrício, Clara Sassi, thank you so much, Mayra, and Leticia for the support. Tony, thank you again, the Deputy Consul General for the UK in Rio, who opened this event. And of course, I would never forget to thank the companies and speakers that are with us here today. We have Rose Strick at the UK Export Finance, UKEF. Solange David, it's David, isn't it, Solange? Brazil Energy Program, BEP. Thank you so much for being with us. Elbia, whom I know for some while, the Eólica, you know, the wind association in Brazil, Wind Energy Association in Brazil. José Partida Solano, right, from Ocean Winds. Megan Arnold, Mrs. Megan Arnold of Enterprise Energy, and Stuart Turl from Wood PLC. Thank you so much for being here. Now, so just some explanation of the dynamics. It's being streamed live through Zoom. We'll have the speaker's presentation followed by the Q&A session. We're going to have the presentations. In the Q&A sessions, the questions can only be sent through the Q&A tool, which will probably be not via chat, guys, probably at the bottom, Q&A you can see of your screen, and some, depending on the configuration, could be on the right-hand side. So please make questions, right? That's what I say. Sometimes people shy out. Please look at the amount of knowledge that we have on screen here. Please do make questions, right? Mention name and company before sending your questions for identification purpose. I will moderate. There's a time constraint, right? We're going to go 90 minutes in total here. We apologize in advance for questions that may not be addressed, may not be answered by the speakers. So now I will introduce the first speaker, Mrs. Rose Strick, the regional head from UKEF, UK Export Finance. Rose, be welcome here. Is the regional head at UKEF, leading international business development activities in the Americas, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Prior to joining UKEF, Rose has held positions across the UK government including the Department for Education and the Department for Work and Pensions, where she has advised on large-scale domestic policy change and international programs. Rose, you have the floor here now. Over to you.
Great, thank you for that warm introduction, Fabio, and thank you to Anthony for setting the scene. So we thought we would kick off with the discussion of finance to begin with, because of course, how do we facilitate this excellent trade, this great technologies, all of this potential? How do we actually make it happen? And I think in the world of offshore wind, especially, finance comes first as facilitating and making these great projects and potential actually happen. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up a couple of slides and quickly go through what it is that we do and what our offer is for Brazil, and specifically offshore wind in Brazil. So to introduce myself, as Fabio mentioned, I'm a regional head. I'm here to speak about UK export finance. So hopefully you can all see this. So who are we? What we are is an export credit agency. We're also a department of the UK government, so we work alongside our colleagues in the Department for International Trade. And we've been doing this, we've been operating since 1919, so we've had 100 years of supporting projects overseas and supporting UK exporters. And we've been consistently named one of the best in the world. We've been named the best ECA, known for innovation and flexibility. And we're also one of the top export credit agencies for sustainable finance deals and renewable energy projects. So what does this mean for Brazil? Our offer for Brazil is essentially what we can do to help in a project, any project in Brazil across different sectors, whether that's renewable energy or whether it's something like infrastructure, is we can help you as a project owner in Brazil, spread and reduce the cost of financing used for projects or purchases that involve importing something from the UK. And how we do that is by acting as a guarantor for your loan. So we're talking about debt finance here. We can also provide a portion of direct loans. So these are government-to-government loans at a fixed rate. And we do this via a bank specifically for clean growth and renewable projects. We have a pot that's allocated of 2 billion globally that we want to target specifically at clean growth projects. We're also here to help UK exporters themselves. So if there are UK exporters in the audience who need working capital financing, bond support, etc., to help you actually fulfill orders that you've placed with Brazil, we're also here to help you. So there is £2 to £3 billion available for projects in Brazil. We've supported a number of projects in Brazil already. We've supported Petrobras with their projects, and now we, as part of the UK government, we are focusing on renewable energy projects. So we're keen to transition ourselves. And the way that it works is essentially, just very quickly, if there is a contract with an exporter that involves a minimum of 20% UK content, what we can do is come in and provide either a guarantee of repayment or UK finance, which actually reduces the risk in the project and means that the loan is taken on the basis of UK government providing the guarantee, which translates to attractive cost savings over the life of the loan. So how long could that loan be? We can offer up to 18 years for renewable projects plus construction. So that could be, a maximum of 20 years to repay a loan taken on for a renewable energy project. The guarantee that we provide, that's 100% and that's unconditional. So that's quite rare in the export credit agency world, to actually provide that unconditional guarantee that's cast iron. We can provide support in local currency. So we can support projects that need debt finance in Brazilian real. So if you have an offtake arrangement, a power purchase agreement that is in Brazilian real, we can actually support it so you match the currency, and that reduces your foreign exchange risk there. We can support a portion of purely local costs. So where you've got a project and you want to contract with Brazilian companies for part of it, we can support a portion of that too. So we've recently increased the amount that we can support there as well. It's not free, so we charge a premium. It's not grant support, but there is an international agreement among OECD countries on the minimum pricing, and we always price the lowest that we can. It's all available publicly and very transparent up front, so you can start assessing pricing as soon as a bank is on board. What we ask for is a minimum of 20% UK content. So that's quite a low threshold. 20% of the overall package of support that we would be providing is quite achievable, very much achievable for offshore wind. We've got a really strong supply chain. And that is one of the lowest national content requirements you'll find among export credit agencies. Some ask for sort of 50% or even 100% of their national content. And we can work with lots of different structures. So this webinar is around the private sector, so we can support private buyers, we can support government buyers, or where there's a mix between the two of a public-private partnership. So why are export credit agencies used on offshore wind projects in the first place? So you'll probably be aware that there's a lot of banks and financiers interested in financing offshore wind projects. Everyone wants to get in on the renewable energy finance. But in the world of finance, things do move slightly slower than the world of technology. And for financiers, for bankers, there is actually still risk involved in offshore wind financing. There's technology, regulatory, and credit risk involved to them. What we do by being involved is reduce that risk to lenders. And that means that a lender is more willing to lend at more attractive rates for a longer period. So that's going to help the overall project. Additionally, if it's a large offshore wind project, they tend to require a variety of financing sources. So what we can do is actually increase that liquidity, increase the amount of financing that's available for one project. And also financing large offshore wind projects is a complex project. And we have experience in offshore wind, which is essential when you're taking on a large project in this financing realm. So very briefly, just a few projects that we have completed in offshore wind already. So we've worked on a few large and quite groundbreaking offshore wind projects in Taiwan. The first of these was Formosa 2, for which won a perfect 10 deal in a trade industry magazine. So we provided 230 million in support, and that was in new Taiwanese dollars. That goes back to the local financing point around how useful that is. And all of these projects involved a 20% UK content. That was in turbines, foundations, auxiliary materials, shipping, cable protection systems, as well as services, which we can include as part of that overall 20% UK content. If you have operation and maintenance, project management, these sort of things can be included from the UK. So I don't want to take too much of your time, so I'll wrap up there. But please do ask any questions and our details will be shared. Of course, the first step for any project is just reaching out and establishing contact with us, and we can guide you through the process and let you know what we think the next steps would be. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Rose. Back to Fabio here. Thank you so much. I was quite impressed with the 20% figure. It's indeed quite a low threshold. Very interesting indeed. And I know that indeed the UKEF is very active in Brazil. And congrats, for being one of the top ECAs globally. Look, if you have any questions, please go to the Q&A tool at the bottom. I'll keep repeating that. Please don't shy out from making questions there. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Solange Davi, right, as the offshore wind coordinator at the BEP Brazil Energy Program. Solange, be welcome indeed here to our webinar. Solange is a lawyer, master and doctor in electrical engineering from the Polytechnic School of the University of São Paulo, Bachelor of History, Professor of Energy Law. I was quite impressed, a lawyer and an engineer. That's quite different, Solange. She is currently a member of the board of directors of Santo Antonio Energia. She's a chairwoman of the board, I would say. also at Aeris Energia, wind blade industry, at the wind blade industry, and Sigre Brasil also. She is a member of the Energy Law Commission of OAB São Paulo. OAB is the lawyers association in Brazil, right? Solange, thank you so much. Over to you now. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabio. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. You'd like to thank you for the opportunity, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here today in order to present our investment guide. I will share my screen with you in order to give some details about the investment guide in offshore wind in Brazil. First, I want to clarify that this work was developed within the scope of the Brazil Energy Program. All the activities of the BEP have been developed in accordance with the Memorandum of Understanding signed by the United Kingdom and the Brazilian Ministry of Mines and Energy. The objective of BEP is help Brazil to accelerate the transition to renewable energies by taking advantage of technologies and innovation while seeking to promote gender equity and social inclusion. As Fabio told you, I was the coordinator of the offshore wind area on BEP. Our main issue was the question, how can we help offshore wind investors in Brazil, considering that we have at least 3 challenges concerning technology, regulation, and costs. We understood that BEP would help in providing investors with up-to-date online information on regulatory framework, opportunities and conditions of offshore wind projects in Brazil. The main goal was knowledge facilitation and decision-making. The numbers show us that there is a great opportunity to deploy offshore wind power in Brazil. The onshore industry already occupies the 2nd place in the Brazilian electricity matrix. Brazil has 7,367 kilometers coastline and expressive potential for the development of offshore wind. The technical potential is estimated at around 700 gigawatts, considering only areas up to 50 meters according Energy Research Office. It means there is an expectation of new investments in the offshore area. In fact, things are happening very fast. Consider that, for example, currently, there are more than 20 projects submitted to IBAMA that represents more than 45 gigawatts here in Brazil. I will present a brief view of the contents of the guide in 3 slides. The guide, the main guide, the general guide, and 2 databases, but the general guide is presented in 4 sections. Section A presents information on the current development and regulatory status of the electricity sector. You can find, for example, general information on the Brazilian electric sector concerning permits, license, authorizations, market organization, and public institutions. I need to emphasize that we don't have, at least until now, a one-stop shop. I mean, the developers need to ask different permissions at different institutions. Section B presents initial mapping of the value chain potential of the offshore wind sector, taking into account the possible transition of players from the oil and gas and onshore wind sector to the offshore wind sector, as well as the institutions and associations that will be able to interact with this sector. The section also presents existing support and training programs in Brazil, which can help boost the offshore wind sector in our country. Section C contains general information on investments in Brazil. We have useful information available for both domestic and foreign investors. And finally, Section D provides specific information from the states of Ceará, Espírito Santo, Rio Grande do Norte, Rio Grande do Sul, and Rio de Janeiro, regarding wind potential, infrastructure, incentives, and financing lines, as well as industry support. It's worth noting that these states were selected in accordance with the premises indicated in the guide, without prejudice, the inclusion of other states of the federation in new versions of this guide. Concerning database, we have the database number 1, contains information and indication about suppliers and programs. In fact, we have prepared a spreadsheet with data from supplier of goods, products, services, considering suppliers from Brazil, from UK in general. We present a research, development, and innovations programs existing here that can help investors, and qualification and training programs considering diversity and social inclusion vision. And we presented also financial promotion programs for renewable technologies and internalization of investments. And the database number 2 contains information and indication about the suppliers and programs. In fact, we have prepared a spreadsheet with data from suppliers, for federal public agencies, department, and state agencies, science and technology centers, financial institutions, universities, and sectorial associations, and other institutions that can help investors here in Brazil, considering federal, state, and municipalities also. And there are some documents that we use, and I conclude my presentation with an indication of some of the documents that were the basis for the preparation of the investor's guide. Among the numerous documents produced in Brazil on the subject, such as the Energy National Plan. Thank you again, and I'm available for any clarifications. Thank you very much.
Hi, Solange. Thank you so much for your presentation. Back to Fabio here. Look, I think that the OSW, the Offshore Wind Investment Guide for Brazil, is quite a key tool for planning investment in the sector in Brazil, you know. And I saw the potential of 700 giga. This is an initial assessment. I'm quite sure that's going to go much further than this. This is 50-meter depth. I'm quite sure it's going to go much further. It's already sizable, you know. And it raised my attention to database number 2, you know, on contact stakeholders, a relational culture. Brazil, this is quite important to have, you know, these contacts and stakeholders at hand. Thank you so much, Solange. So again, please, audience, ask questions. Just take advantage of all this knowledge on screen. Now I'm going for the next speaker, and there are people in the chat already asking your email address, Elbia. People in the chat are already asking your email address. You know, Mrs. Elbia Ganon, she's the CEO of Eólica, the National Wind Association in Brazil. She's been heading Eólica for a decade and has worked for the strengthening and sustainable growth of wind energy, the second source of the Brazilian electricity matrix. I'm a witness of all this work of Elbia over the years, right? It's a great work indeed. An active voice in the global debate on diversity and economic inclusion in the energy sector. It defends, you know, Eólica, the idea of Brazilian energy transformation, and it has been contributing strongly to the development of renewable energies. Economist, PhD in economy with over 20 years of career in the energy sector. She has accumulated experience at CCEE, the Ministry of Mines and Energy, the Ministry of Finance, and ANEEL, you know, the power agency, the power regulator in Brazil. So she's an academic with published books and articles, and a specialist in the electric energy regulation and markets, having worked in this area since 1998. Elbia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us.
Bom dia, boa tarde, Fábio, muito obrigada. É um prazer estar aqui para discutir esse tema com vocês e aqui com os meus colegas do setor e a Solange, que acabou de falar. Então, estou muito feliz de poder falar com vocês sobre o tema de offshore, principalmente porque nós avançamos muito nos últimos 2 anos, 3 anos, e eu tenho falado com o pessoal do Reino Unido. Esses avanços que o Brasil tem tido nas discussões de offshore, muito se deve ao trabalho do Reino Unido. Então, eu agradeço muito, e recentemente o trabalho do BEP tem servido de suporte, e tem sido um suporte muito importante, inclusive para o Ministério de Minas e Energia, para realizar os trabalhos que estão sendo realizados, que eu vou mencionar. Eu pediria a vocês para pedir licença para vocês para eu poder compartilhar os meus slides. Sempre eu vou só testar aqui se eu vou conseguir fazer isso, porque às vezes dá problema. Só um minutinho. Às vezes eu encontro dificuldade para fazer o compartilhamento, mas está aqui. Uhum. Bom, eu pergunto se está funcionando bem, Fábio, se o meu slide está aparecendo.
Great indeed, beautiful opening page.
Muito obrigada, Fábio. Então, eu vou trazer os dados do setor de wind. A minha apresentação está em inglês, mas eu me sinto mais à vontade falando em português, então eu espero que vocês não se importem. Bom, primeiro a Eólica, a Associação Brasileira de Energia Eólica, ela foi criada em 2002, justamente no período em que foi feita a primeira lei no Brasil que tratava de investimentos em eólica, que foi o PROINFA. Então, no ano que vem, a gente vai completar 20 anos, e a Eólica é uma associação privada, sem fins lucrativos, que tem por objetivo trazer, inserir e estabilizar e aumentar os investimentos em energia eólica no Brasil. É claro que nós começamos lá atrás com onshore, e nos últimos 3, 4 anos a gente tem estudado a possibilidade de fazer offshore e também somos uma associação de offshore. Bom, nós temos hoje mais de 100 associados, nós representamos toda a cadeia produtiva da indústria, desde o investidor nos parques eólicos até os fabricantes de equipamentos e fornecedores de serviços, e a gente tem trabalhado fortemente para o crescimento da fonte. Mais recentemente, eu também, além de ser presidente da Eólica, passei a ocupar a posição de vice-presidente do GIUEC, e nós estamos trabalhando fortemente para aumentar os investimentos em energia eólica, e aí não só no Brasil, mas também no mundo. Recentemente, nós lançamos um manifesto para a COP26, vamos participar da COP26, amanhã eu viajo para a COP e vamos estar lá todos os dias da COP. Temos muitas atividades relativas ao wind e principalmente ao wind offshore, porque nós temos uma colisão. Bom, eu trago aqui para vocês dados muito importantes que foram publicados no mês de março, no relatório, que é o relatório do GIUEC, que é o Global Wind Energy Council, o relatório chamado Global Wind Report, e ele mostra os investimentos em energia eólica. E um fator muito importante é que em 2020 nós batemos recordes de instalação de energia eólica no mundo. Nós instalamos 93 gigawatts de energia eólica no mundo e em 2019 nós instalamos 60 gigawatts. Então foi um crescimento mais de 50% de crescimento e num ano de pandemia, né? E por que esse investimento aconteceu no ano de pandemia? Surpreendentemente, é porque os efeitos da pandemia no chão de fábrica, né, e na construção dos parques, ele não foi muito forte, as empresas se adaptaram muito rapidamente aos protocolos, e as decisões de construção de investimento, naturalmente, elas são tomadas com antecedência, com 3, 4 anos. Então, por essa razão, a pandemia não afetou as instalações de offshore e os investimentos de offshore em 2020. E nós, então, trouxemos essa nova capacidade, e quando nós olhamos para essa nova capacidade, nós colocamos os top 5 de investimentos e, portanto, o top 5 do mercado. E aí nós temos a China, que foi o maior investidor desses 93 gigawatts, 56% vieram da China, e depois os Estados Unidos com 18%, e o Brasil foi o terceiro país que mais investiu em energia eólica no ano de 2020. O Brasil, nos últimos 4 anos, tem se destacado como um importante player nos investimentos de energia eólica. Quando nós olhamos especificamente para offshore, nós estamos tendo um crescimento ano a ano, e é claro, o offshore começou bem depois, né, da onshore, e nós já tivemos uma instalação de 6,1 gigawatt no ano de 2020, e a Ásia respondeu pela metade disso, por 3 gigawatts, a Europa por 3 gigawatts, e a América do Norte já apresentou um investimento da ordem de 100 megawatts. Quando nós olhamos esse total de investimento ocorrido em 2020, a gente nota que esses dados, eles estão agora, em termos prospectivos, olhando para 2021, 2022, a gente já consegue perceber os efeitos da pandemia, porque, como eu mencionei, os efeitos eles são com 3 anos de antecedência. Então, em 2022, 2023, é que a gente vai perceber os efeitos da pandemia, mas, mesmo assim, esses efeitos eles não serão muito fortes quando nós olhamos os vários países em conjunto. E nós estamos vendo aqui, destacando o offshore no gráfico abaixo, que em 2020 nós tivemos 6,1 gigawatts instalados, e em 2021 nós vamos quase que dobrar os investimentos em offshore, vamos para 11,2, e depois 7,7 em 2022, e aí voltamos a crescer em 2023, porque 2022 a gente sente mais fortemente os efeitos da pandemia, e lá em 2025, a quantidade de offshore já vai ser 4 vezes o que ocorreu em 2020. Então, nós estamos com uma perspectiva de instalação de cerca de 24 gigawatts, falando especificamente de offshore. Esse número ele é muito interessante quando nós trazemos para o cenário global, e aí nós colocamos o Brasil como um país muito forte em investimentos de energia eólica onshore, e nós estamos percebendo os investimentos em offshore, principalmente na China, na Holanda, na Bélgica, e no Reino Unido. Então, geralmente, os países da Ásia e os países da Europa, e percebendo já um movimento dos Estados Unidos. Nos investimentos totais, e aí quando nós falamos de capacidade instalada hoje, o Brasil ele tem se destacado como um importante player global de investimentos, e dos 707 gigawatts de capacidade instalada onshore, o Brasil já é o 7º país no ranking mundial de maior capacidade instalada. E quando nós olhamos em investimentos offshore, a gente tem o Reino Unido com 29% e a China com 28%, e depois a Alemanha. Então, a gente percebe um crescimento muito forte desses investimentos. Olhando para o Brasil, a gente tem um aspecto muito importante com relação a onshore, é que o fator de capacidade, a média global do fator de capacidade, ela está em torno de 40%. E o Brasil tem uma média muito superior, ele tem o maior fator de capacidade, considerando os outros países, apresentando 49% de fator de capacidade. E o que é que a gente está percebendo, né? Olhando o histórico de novas tecnologias, e aí, quando a gente fala de offshore, a gente tem empresas que estão cada vez mais entrando nesse mercado de offshore. Quando nós olhamos para a Ásia e para a Europa, principalmente, a gente sabe que o caminho do crescimento do investimento vai vir por offshore, e as principais empresas, e aí a gente destaca a Siemens Gamesa, a GE e a Vestas, que estão investindo em tecnologia, e que essa tecnologia está ficando cada vez mais competitiva. E é essa questão que é muito importante para o Brasil. Quando a gente fala de competitividade, e aí nós podemos perceber o Brasil já entrando nesse cenário global de investimentos também em offshore, e isso se deve principalmente à evolução tecnológica. O Brasil ele tem um enorme potencial para a produção de energia eólica, e esse potencial ele está nos parques onshore. Então, esse primeiro mapa ele mostra o quanto a gente tem potencial, essas áreas mais escuras, perto do vermelho e do roxo, mostra o potencial onshore. Com a tecnologia conhecida hoje de torres com 130 metros e máquinas chegando a 6 megawatts de potência, o Brasil tem um potencial onshore da ordem de 800 gigawatts, sendo que a nossa capacidade instalada hoje está em torno de 20 gigawatts. Então, a gente tem uma possibilidade muito grande ainda de explorar esse potencial, e os nossos estudos recentes, tanto o estudo da EPE e, mais recentemente, um estudo do Banco Mundial, mostra a potencialidade de offshore em toda a costa brasileira, e o nosso potencial é da ordem de 1.000 gigawatts ou de 1 terawatt de potencial offshore. Então, em termos de possibilidade de investimento, a gente tem uma possibilidade muito grande. Aqui eu mostro a nossa curva de crescimento, e é a nossa curva de crescimento onshore. Nós estamos aqui em 2021 e vamos encerrar o ano com 21 gigawatts de capacidade instalada, e os números já mostram que em 2026 nós vamos alcançar 31 gigawatts. Então, nós vamos crescer 10 gigawatts em mais ou menos 5 anos, e o que está aqui, esse dado que está aqui, é dado de contratos que já foram assinados e que os projetos estão em construção. Nós temos que somar a essa curva o que nós ainda vamos contratar em 2022, 2023. Então, em 2030, é bem possível que a gente ultrapasse já os 40 gigawatts de capacidade instalada. E quando nós olhamos para a matriz elétrica brasileira, a eólica já é hoje a segunda fonte de geração dessa matriz, e ela responde por cerca de 11% de capacidade instalada, sendo a hidrelétrica a principal fonte, com mais de 60 gigawatts de capacidade, ou melhor, com mais de 60% da matriz elétrica nacional. E, em termos de geração, hoje, como nós estamos no segundo semestre, a eólica gera muito mais. E nesse contexto de crise hídrica, que as hidrelétricas estão gerando pouco, as eólicas estão alcançando até 20% de geração para o sistema brasileiro como um todo. Os nossos investimentos estão concentrados mais fortemente no Nordeste e no Sul do país, sendo o Nordeste com o maior potencial e com a maior capacidade instalada. Cerca de 80% dos nossos parques estão concentrados no Nordeste. Quando nós falamos especificamente de offshore, e como eu mencionei no início, nos últimos 2 anos, o mercado de offshore no Brasil tem entrado numa velocidade muito rápida, os investidores estão chegando, a Eólica está recebendo novos associados específicos de offshore. Nós estamos com mais de 10 associados que entraram na Eólica desde o ano passado, pensando especificamente em offshore. Nós estamos já com 22 projetos em licenciamento no IBAMA, aguardando já o licenciamento, e as empresas já se preparando para investir em offshore. Nós temos uma fabricante de pá que vai entrar no mercado para fabricar as pás, e muitas empresas como a Shell, a Equinor, a Ocean Wind e também a Ørsted, que estão entrando no mercado brasileiro, além de empresas fornecedoras na cadeia de serviços. Nós temos estudos importantes, a Solange já mencionou rapidamente, o Roadmap da EPE, nós temos o PNE, que é o Plano Nacional de 2050, nós temos o PDE, que já contempla offshore, nós temos estudos internacionais que estão também nos ajudando, e esses estudos, eles estão mostrando a potencialidade do mercado brasileiro em toda a costa brasileira. Como eu mencionei, o estudo da EPE, ele tem cerca de 700 gigawatts, e ele mostra quais são os caminhos que devem ser percorridos para que o mercado se desenvolva e de acordo com seu potencial. O Guia do Investidor, que foi realizado pelo BEP, mostra também esses caminhos, e nós temos estudos também, no caso do Banco Mundial, que coloca o nosso potencial com cerca de 1,2 terawatt. Então, esses estudos estão demonstrando o quanto o nosso mercado é promissor para investimentos de offshore e demonstram a necessidade que nós temos de preparar o nosso mercado. Então, tanto os estudos da EPE aqui apresentados, vocês podem olhar os detalhes depois, quanto o estudo também do Banco Mundial, eles estão mostrando a nossa potencialidade. O IBAMA, com seu termo de referência, mostrando os impactos, né? E aí qual é o padrão que esses complexos eólicos devem seguir para obter o licenciamento. Nós estamos com 46,6 gigawatts já no IBAMA em processo de licenciamento, nós esperamos muito em breve já obter a primeira licença. Além disso, o Brasil tem uma indústria muito forte, e essa indústria foi construída para projetos onshore, e essas empresas, elas são capazes de adaptar para a manufatura offshore. É o caso da GE, da Vestas e da Siemens Gamesa, e as fabricantes de pá e de torres que já estão se preparando para atender o mercado brasileiro. Então, a gente tem toda a potencialidade de se fazer, esses investimentos em offshore, e é claro que agora a gente vai vencendo aos poucos os desafios. E nesse processo de vencer o desafio, nós estamos participando, inclusive, das discussões globais, como eu mencionei, junto ao GIEC. Nós tivemos a elaboração do Guia do Investidor, realizado pelo Reino Unido e entregue ao ministro Bento, que foi aqui apresentado pela nossa colega Solange, e esse guia, ele é uma importante base de documento, como eu falei no início, é um dos documentos mais relevantes para o Brasil, para os investidores, para consultar como iniciar os investimentos. Durante a elaboração dos estudos que o BEP organizou e que o BEP apresentou, foi mostrado e demonstrado em vários momentos a necessidade de se construir uma regulação. Então, nesse processo de construção da regulação, nós conversamos com o Ministério de Minas e Energia, e talvez hoje seja a melhor notícia, nós tivemos uma reunião com o MME na semana passada, e o Ministério de Minas e Energia já vai lançar, em novembro, uma regulação para offshore. Trata-se de um decreto que vai ter as bases principais para os investidores. Com licenciamento no IBAMA e com as bases regulatórias, nós já estamos prontos para partir para o leilão. E na Eólica nós já estamos trabalhando para, a partir do ano que vem, preparar um leilão para investimentos de offshore. Nós tínhamos alguns desafios no início desse ano e, aos poucos, esses desafios foram sendo vencidos. E um deles, o principal, era a ausência de mercado. Nós temos uma oferta muito grande no Brasil e essa oferta de energias renováveis, naturalmente, ela faz com que os projetos concorram entre si. Mas a crise hídrica mostrou que o Brasil precisa de muita contratação. Então, nós temos boas perspectivas para que as contratações ocorram já a partir do ano que vem, e com a regulação pronta, nós vamos trabalhar para isso. Bom, era isso que eu quis trazer nesses minutos que me ofereceram. Muito obrigada pela atenção.
Elbia, thank you very much. Listening well there to me. Thank you so much. You know, it was quite an overview, and this is great news indeed from the Minister of Mines and Energy, and the potential auction next year, you know, the decree by the end of the year. Thank you so much. And we know that this wind sector's construction in Brazil, Eólica, had a massive contribution to all that. We all know that. So now I'm going for the next speaker. Before that, Solange has been asked to provide information on the download of the investment guide. But please, you know, she has already posted in the chat, you know, her email address in the chat. So please just send an email, or maybe Solange would like to post it in the chat, how to download the investment guide. So now I'm going for the next speakers. We are running a bit pressed on time here. Is Mr. José Partida Solano. He's the business development manager for Ocean Winds. And between 2008 and 2013, José Partida took his Master of Science and BSc degrees in civil engineering from the University of Granada. In 2014, he started his Master in Structures, Foundations, and Materials at the University of Madrid. In 2019, he completed his MBA in International Management at ICEX-CECO, ISEC-SICO. From 2016 until 2020, he worked at EDPR in Spain with WTG procurement, also solar bid preparations and onshore wind development projects in Brazil. Currently, he's working with business development at Ocean Winds in Spain. Jose, the floor is yours. And again, to the audience, please make questions. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the excellent introduction. Well, I'm going to share my screen with the presentation I have prepared for you. Please let me know when you can see.
Working well, Jose.
Thank you very much. So, well,
Perfect.
basically, in the presentation, I want to show you the vision that a private investor like Ocean Winds has of the offshore wind market in Brazil. Presenting the opportunity of the offshore wind market in Brazil, the current challenge, and the efforts already done for all the private investor in Brazil. So basically, well, first of all, I would like to just a quick introduction of Ocean Winds, because maybe some of you don't know this company. So basically, Ocean Winds is a joint venture, a long-term joint venture between ENGIE and EDPR, two of the main onshore wind or global energy players worldwide. So basically, well, this company, Ocean Wind, is the exclusive vehicle for both companies to invest in offshore wind. This collaboration came from a long time ago, since 2013, when we started to collaborate in some tenders, and well, the collaboration was very successful. So companies decided to establish a new company, and was formally established in March 2020. Both companies share vision of the offshore wind sector. The company is 50% ENGIE, 50% EDPR, and we have a long-term commitment, developing, building, and operating the assets. So, our main target is to be one of the top 5 offshore wind developers, of offshore wind players in 2025. So, to achieve that, our business plan forecast to have between 5 and 7 gigawatts under construction and in operation, and to have between 5 and 10 gigawatts under advanced development. So, just to say that ADP and ENGIE are present in Brazil more than 20 years ago, being market leaders in renewables, transmission line, and natural gas transport. So, first of all, talking about offshore wind market in Brazil. So, Brazil has a very good opportunity to use its excellent offshore wind resource to trade with energy, with, for example, green hydrogen, and to help to balance its energy mix and not to be so dependent on hydro. First, in the coast, we can see that the potential, the offshore wind resource is excellent in the northeast, southeast, and the south, and for shallow water, so for bottom fixed foundations that are more competitive so far. Offshore wind in Brazil is more stable than onshore wind, and with an energy profile more similar to the energy demand. One of the main key points here for the Brazilian offshore wind is that some of the offshore wind sites are near large consumption centers like Rio de Janeiro and Rio Grande do Sul, avoiding building transmission line and helping to balance the overall system. Could be a similar case of the USA East Coast. Also, as I said before, is a possibility to create a large green hydrogen hub in the main Brazilian ports, which could enable Brazil to trade with energy. Based on that, some Brazilian states have already disclosed plans for hydrogen plants in the ports of Pecém and Porto da Sul. And lastly, offshore wind is not only to have a technology competitive, it's also the offshore wind brings also a supply chain to the country. So, and it creates a lot of employees. So basically, and a lot of jobs. So basically, developing offshore wind in Brazil could help to create a supply chain in Brazil and to make kind of a hub for South America. Well, as Elvia said before, there are a lot of requests in IBAMA for start the environmental permits, more than 46 gigawatts. That is impressive. But some developers started some time ago and have already started to invest some money in site investigations. Currently, there are project overlapping in some areas. So, early developers, we believe a first come, first served concept may be adopted for exclusive investigation to promote further investment. So, a key message. So, the private sector is willing to continue further investment in site investigation. However, it's needed a regulation in place that incentivize this private investment and avoid speculator market observers. So, well, basically, we believe a system, a framework that incentivize the greenfield, like in South Korea or in Denmark, where you start to develop the project, you start to invest, and you have the civil list, so you have certain security that the money you are putting is for your project and not for others. Is they want the framework that private investors like the most. But also, well, could be created some kind of preference for the original developers, like, well, for example, a right to match in a potential auction, like in Germany, for example, that promote this further investment from private sector. So basically, if a dedicated energy auction is set in the short term, medium term, we will see hopefully first project online in 2030. So that's mean that the supply chain needs to be developed within next years. So, well, as I said before, a clear regulation framework is needed to promote those further investments. But we are in the right path to because, well, we have seen a lot of efforts from the policymakers and from the main authorities to create a dedicated framework that promotes this private investment. So far, 2 bills dedicated to offshore wind have been presented from different senators, and the Ministry of Mine and Energy is working to launch a decree before year end, as Sylvia said before. So what are the main challenges a private investor face in Brazil? So as I say, there is not a clear regulation, so there is not a civil list process. So it's needed that regulation which grants exclusivity to develop the sea areas, and with that, all the private sector is willing to invest more money because the opportunities is there. Also, would be needed a special regime for legacy projects to reassure that the investment already done are not lost. As I said, some of the original developers have already invested some money in site investigations. Also, it's needed a clear permitting process because so far you have to request the permits to different regulators, authorities, but it's needed just a single window, having only one authority in charge for the permitting process. And well, we believe the decision is already made, and we will see just one authority in charge of all these permits. And also, we don't only need a decree, we also need a regulation in place from different authorities to understand how we can obtain the different permits. So far, for example, the Despacho de Registro de Outorga, the DRO, which will set some kind of requirements to measure the wind conditions on the sea, are not established. So that's implied any floating LiDAR has been deployed so far. So we need that regulation to start to deploy floating LiDAR on the sea and to start to gather wind data. And lastly, well, but will come afterwards, we'll need a slot in the energy auction dedicated to offshore wind. As you know, well, the investor need a long-term remuneration scheme, like, for example, we have in Brazil for onshore technologies that give us visibility. So having said that, and just to conclude, the efforts all the main players have done so far, together with the efforts that Eólica, GWEC have done so far. So we have seen now results. The first one we really saw was the termo de referencia launched by IBAMA in November 2020, which set the environmental requirements. So now we have, we know, all the private investors know what we have to do to obtain an environmental permit. So that is very positive. As I said before, there are two bills presented. No, first one was the bill presented by the Senator Jean-Paul Prates in Rio Grande Norte in February this year. So this bill is ongoing. The second one just was presented well, some days ago by the Deputy Danilo Forti in Ceará. And also, well, there is those laws in the current parliamentary situation in Brazil, it will take time to be approved. So that's why the Ministry of Mine and Energy is drafting a decree that hopefully will be launched before year end. So all the private investor will have a clear regulation to start further investment. So just to conclude, and the message I would like you please bear in mind is Brazil presents a huge opportunity to use its offshore wind resource to trade with energy and to balance the system. Second, there are investment already done for early movers, and there is willingness to continue to invest more money as long as we have an attractive regulation that promotes that investment. And we have seen some efforts, some results as consequence of the work we have already done so far. So that's all. Thank you very much. If any of you have any kind of question, please let me know. Happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Jose. You know, it would be great to have the first offshore wind projects online in Brazil before 2030. Indeed, it would be great. You know, there's a lot of work being done in the regulatory framework, but there is a lot still to be done. As you said, as you highlighted very well in your presentation. So I'm going for the next speaker, Mrs. Megan Arnold. She's the Regional Development Manager for Enterprise Energy for South America. She's a British, the Enterprise Energy is a British Singaporean company whose roots were formed back in 1999. Before joining Enterprise Energy, Megan worked for GE Renewable Energy for over 10 years, holding senior roles throughout Europe in both on and offshore wind. She has held directorships with Renewables UK and Renewables East in the UK. So Megan, all the best for you in your presentation now. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen here. Good afternoon and good morning to everybody. I hope everyone is well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the energy transition and whether we have the power to do it. So first, just a little bit of information about who Enterprise Energy and who we are. As mentioned, we were founded in 2009 after our chairman, Ian Hatton, built up the Eclipse energy company, and he then sold his wind farm called the Ormond offshore wind farm to Vattenfall, a Swedish utility company. Ormond was one of the round one offshore wind farms. How did we start? Well, we kind of coming from Ian's background as a geologist in the oil and gas industry. We have explorer mentality, so looking for natural resources is a natural affiliation for the company. We have been typically early movers both in looking at new locations, but also in technology and resources. We have a combined experience in our company looking at both wind, offshore wind particular, as well as the oil and gas background. So we're looking into the new markets of hydrogen, and we also have quite a strong technology background. So we started after selling the Eclipse wind farm and the Eclipse company and Ormond wind farm. We moved into the United States and we started to look at places where we could take the expertise that we had from both industries, oil and gas and offshore wind. And we started looking in the Gulf of Mexico, and we were successful with the Department of Energy in the US to design a substructure for multi-megawatt offshore wind that could be deployed in quite a technically challenging environment where we see quite strong hurricanes in the US. From there, we actually took the technology that we designed and moved on to the Taiwanese market. I know Rose mentioned some of these projects. We are also a developer here. We've gone into joint venture with Northland Power from Canada and Mitsui from Japan, and we have over 1 gigawatt of offshore wind development using that technology that we gained from our studies in the US to build these jacket structures for wind turbines and deploying into Taiwan. Here we're using the new 14 megawatt machine from Siemens Gamesa Renewables. This has taken us into the Asia market, where we are also developing a project in Vietnam, and we have plans for nearly 3.5 gigawatts of wind off the coast of Vietnam. And again, we're looking at different sorts of technologies that we can deploy in new environments like Vietnam. What this has done is also led us to looking around the rest of the globe for countries where there is potential for wind, which is what has brought us into Brazil with its strong wind resource. I'm going to talk firstly a little bit about the energy transition and why we need to change how we have generated our power across the globe. I'm sure many of you are already aware of, with the increase of global fossil fuels over the past 150 plus years, we've seen world population grow on the back of that fossil fuel energy power source by extending effectively our ability to access medical care, to have extended life, for electrification. And on the flip side, that energy dichotomy has come with obviously an increase in CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. And this is what is leading us to looking at the whole energy profile and how we generate energy across the globe. Just to look a little bit at Brazil's emissions, obviously this is not on a per capita basis. We know that Brazil is a very large country with a large population, but it does show in a profile that not only our greenhouse gas emissions, which is not just carbon dioxide, but also nitrous oxide and methane are incredibly high because of the large population, but also because of the different types of industry that you have in Brazil, agriculture and forestry being another one of those. So what does this mean in context of where we are just from energy as a whole? So if we look at fossil fuels back in 2019, making up about 84% of global consumption, and the fact that these resources are actually on the decline. So we've already passed global peak oil. We are probably certainly getting very close to passing peak gas production. Coal, why there's a lot more coal, we also know that coal is one of the more damaging technologies from global greenhouse gas emissions. So at the same time, whilst we're passing these peaks, our world population is growing, as is our consumption of electrical power. What this means, if we are to decarbonize, we have an energy gap or an energy shift in terms of changing the technologies that we're using. But we also have a growing population where the demand is increasing. And so what we are seeing is quite a large energy gap if we continue to consume at the rate that we are. But just looking a little more closely at Brazil, obviously this is from the IEA, and you can see in the bottom right-hand corner is that the red line represents renewables. And whilst we're seeing quite a lot of growth in renewables, we obviously see that fossil fuels are making up a significant portion of power in Brazil. It has already been mentioned, and it might be a little hard to see the graph in the top right-hand corner, that hydro makes up over 60% of Brazil's baseload energy supply. particularly for electricity. And what we see in this graph on the right-hand side is from 1962 to 2017, we see a declining rate of rainfall. And as most of Brazil's hydro is rainfall fed, what we're seeing is this decline in rainfall is not La Nina or El Nino effects. What we're seeing is a consistent reduction. And that is, there are many people who debate about this, but likely to be caused by increasing drought and forest fires, leading to a decline in rainfall. And of course, that's all well known as a subsequent consequence to climate change. So we see that some of the profile of how energy might be produced in the future is going to change. If we look at globally what's happening with gas and oil at the moment post-COVID, we see gas prices up 250% in 2021 from last year. It was at $84 a barrel for oil in Friday. I checked this morning and it is up to about nearly 86 or just over 86 this morning. We see that China is taking a lot of the demand for gas out of the global market as China restarts post-COVID. And we're seeing that making some quite volatile shocks in the market across Europe, for example. In Germany and Spain, those prices have gone up 3 to 4 times the average compared to 2019 and 2020. In the UK, we have a slightly regulated market, and that has resulted in 14 energy companies going bust, essentially not being able to pay the gas spiking price. What this has also led to in other areas of the globe is an increased demand for LNG. And we know that LNG helped stabilise the power supply market, when there was supply issues with hydro on the back of the droughts. So what we're seeing is quite a volatile changing market on pricing, but also on the back of different changes with climate change. So how do we actually change? Well, you probably all heard by now that hydrogen is one of the top topics in energy transition at the moment. And why is that? Well, hydrogen is actually quite a ubiquitous element in the universe. And it is also one that can be transferred from, if you have a good water supply, you can actually, make hydrogen from the electrolyzation and splitting of water molecules. You can also use that hydrogen in a multitude of different technologies in terms of industries that it can supply. And it can also be converted to ammonia, which again then can address other industries and power supply. The key thing is about hydrogen is what is the fuel source. And for those who work in hydrogen, you will have heard that there are different types of colours that classify the type of fuel that produces hydrogen. And for fossil fuels, it can be called grey, brown or black. If it's made from nuclear, it can be yellow. And then you have blue with carbon sequestration. And you can also then have green from different forms of renewables. And even in that, there are a number of shades of those colours that can differentiate the type of technology. So the potential for hydrogen to decarbonise and potentially in the future become a rival to LNG because of its ability to be transported. All right, so just a little bit more about the mismatch in the market of what we see. If you can see the graph again produced by the IEA, you can see that there have been a number of governments announcing pledges to transition with hydrogen. And then there's a little bit of a gap when we look at both the net zero emissions to achieve those targets, the announcements and the plans for actually hydrogen projects, particularly green, to be net zero positive. So we're seeing, again, a gap in the energy market. We're seeing, again, like we're saying, the world population and the demand becoming higher. And then we also see this transition to hydrogen, sometimes built as the saviour for a decarbonised future. But still, we see this enormous gap in that transition. We are also seeing countries such as Europe and big Japan, big population centres, transitioning their economies for the future, looking at the hydrogen market, particularly looking at how electricity can be decarbonised to meet, for example, electrical vehicles that we're seeing commitments for in places like Europe and Japan. So investment and the financing in green hydrogen infrastructure is going to be one of the big targets that we're going to take a look at in the future. So at Enterprise Energy, we're looking at how we can build offshore wind farms using our experience in that market and delinking it from the wire. So effectively, whilst we see grid-connected wind farms as being substantially needed in dealing with the demand gap for electricity, we are also looking at how we can use it directly to produce hydrogen offshore. So our aim is to try and develop the lowest cost of energy and the lowest cost of hydrogen using the scale that we can get from offshore wind to make hydrogen and hydrogen-based products. So as I said, there are three different areas I'm looking at. So we're looking at speed, scale, and storage, or what we know as the 3 S's. So the speed is combined, one, to meet the gap, but also to decarbonize. The scale is using offshore wind and trying to develop renewables at scale to provide the sort of energy that we need to produce the hydrogen. It is also looking at the technology and saying, can we get the technology advancements from the electrolyzers, from the turbines, etc., to be able to build them in scale, and to look at that kind of scale that will drive down effectively the costs of green hydrogen over time. And the more longer term picture is also looking at how can we store energy, whether it's from batteries or whether it's from technology that hydrogen can produce also in the future. And that will look at optimizing and sharing industrial knowledge that's been built up for years in both the existing hydrogen market, existing ammonia markets, but also in oil and gas and that transition. So just to take a look at some experience from the UK, I was involved in the early stages of offshore wind when at the time that the round 1 wind farms were developed, we were seeing prices of around £140 a megawatt hour. This was pre-2010. Then as the developments have taken a hold, and this graph here was developed by Catapult, which is an agency in the UK that looks particularly at offshore wind. This was done in 2019. And so what you could see here is in 2016 is that the cost forecast was for £122 a megawatt hour. And then if you look along as we travel into the future, the estimates are that we were going to get down to around the low 40s, for effectively to out to 2050. But what we have actually seen is in the round 3 strike price, which is the mechanism under which the contracts for difference are applied in the UK, that's their subsidisation mechanism in the UK, is that actually we started to see wind farms already coming down to underneath £40 a megawatt hour using technology from the turbine manufacturers of around 10 megawatts per turbine. Round 4 will start to go through this process later this year, and we'll probably see turbines being estimated around 15 to 17 megawatts. So it'll be interesting to see what the lowest cost of energy projections will be for wind in the future. And what this is demonstrating is if the market is developed and the regulations are in place and that market is continuous, is that new technology will develop and the private industry will help to bring those costs down. So just a little bit more about Enterprise and what we're doing with hydrogen. We commissioned a well-known engineering company who are specialised in offshore. They particularly work in the oil and gas industry to help design our offshore green hydrogen platform prototype. So what we've been looking at is how we can combine our offshore wind farms and what the minimum size of power that we would need to be able to produce hydrogen purely offshore. So again, we're looking at offshore wind because of its scale, and then looking at what the economics would be to produce hydrogen. Would it be able to produce hydrogen profitably? and what kind of technology would we need to be looking at in that offshore environment. So just looking ahead at how we see this will work is that the power will join up with the platform from the wind farm to the hydrogen platform offshore. And then we start to look at, well, what will we do with that hydrogen? Most likely that we will ship that to shore, where it would either be converted into ammonia. And in ammonia, it could be used for multiple markets, for example, in agriculture or chemicals. It could also be used to put into ships to be transported around the globe as a fuel source, that where it can be either be converted back into hydrogen or possibly into other products. It is also an area of the marine sector, and its aims to decarbonise, where we see that ammonia will probably play quite a significant part in future marine fuel usage. Perhaps it could also be used to blend in with the existing natural gas grid lines that we see. We also obviously can also use electrical sources for back pumping either directly from the wind farm back to the grid, or hydrogen being used back onshore to be used for power and converted into electricity. Or what we could see also in the future, and this is probably a little further down the line, where we'll see perhaps there might be either specific vessels and technology that's created to use floating hydrogen storage. We could also see ancillary markets for both oxygen and brine, which are considered to be byproducts of the hydrogen process, but there are also markets for both of these. What this will require is quite significant investment in the port side infrastructure. And this is where we see that there will be great opportunities for local companies to participate in that development of the supply chain, from ports, from the companies that service these types of industrial activities. And with that, obviously becomes significant employment opportunities, as well as opportunities for talent and technology innovation, as well as transition from existing industries. So we are obviously participating, in the whole of that supply chain, looking at what we've done in the past with oil and gas, what we've done with offshore wind. We're looking at different types of foundations and technologies, but then looking into the future, not just 2030, but well beyond that, as we look at this combined evolution and revolution of the energy markets. We are starting a secondary study into looking at additional technology applications for our offshore platform for the hydrogen. We also have a deeper water foundation technology, which maybe doesn't apply as much to Brazil, but for other energy markets. And then we are also looking at how we look at the offtake market from both the import and export market. And we see both opportunities for Brazil for import locally, but also export across into Europe. So just a little bit of a summary. Essentially, we're looking for clarity, support and stability from the Brazilian authorities, as some of the other presenters have also mentioned. We are really looking at that international and national collaboration, and this is very much similar to the latest hydrogen strategy that's being produced in Brazil. And we look to develop in collaboration with our local partners, one of them being Rio Grande do Norte State, which we signed an MOU with just recently. So our business model is to deliver more than just energy. It's looking at the entire socio-economic development for sustainability well into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Megan. Sorry for jumping in. It's because we are a bit pressed on the time. This was quite an impressive, broad presentation, which gives a lot of food for thought, right? I was really impressed with the overall offshore hydrogen production system and the synergies that may be there. We have a question on this. So now we're going for the next speaker. After this excellent presentation, we're going to Mr. Stuart Turrell. Is a business development manager at Wood PLC, working across energy transition activities. including offshore wind, hydrogen, and carbon capture. Very, very interesting carbon capture. Stuart is also focused on decarbonization of the upstream offshore oil and gas assets, including electrification from offshore wind. Stuart has previously worked on site selection activities for offshore wind and several subsea cable projects. Thank you, Stuart, for being here with us. Same thanks that I gave to Megan. Floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks very much. I'll quickly share my screen then. Hopefully this should be coming through. If you can let me know when you can see that, Fabio.
Oh, yes, I can see that. Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks very much for taking the time to dial in today, everyone. I'm going to run through a short presentation on wood and offshore wind, and also give a bit of background about how we can help transition personnel and capabilities across from the oil and gas industry into the offshore renewables industry. So in terms of the agenda for this slide deck, I'll run through a quick introduction to Wood as an organisation, briefly touch on our offshore wind capabilities, give a quick overview of Wood Brazil, and then start running through some example wind clients that we're currently working with, some challenges that we see in the offshore wind industry, and how that can be supported by the oil and gas industry, and then also talk through some synergies in terms of capabilities and expertise across those two. So firstly, just starting with Wood as an organisation. So Wood are a multinational engineering and consulting business. We service a number of industries, including oil and gas, power, mining, petrochemicals and refining, as well as renewables industry. We employ over 40,000 people globally in well over 60 countries. And we're fully committed to supporting our clients through the energy transition. And that's really reflected in our revenue streams. I think if you look back just over 5 years ago, a significant proportion, greater than 80% of our overall revenue was from conventional energy, i.e. oil and gas. And that's now starting to transition more into sustainable infrastructure, renewables and other energies, which now make up over 50% of our revenue. That's not to say that we're not still supporting the conventional oil and gas industries. We very much are. It's just that we are really growing, seeing significant increase in the support that we're offering our existing clients and new clients in sustainable infrastructure and the energy transition. So very quickly, running through some sort of offshore wind highlights. In terms of Wood's expertise in offshore wind, I think the middle box there on the top row clearly sort of demonstrates the number of projects and the scale of demand in terms of projects that we've been involved in over the years. And the bottom right there shows some of the percentages of offshore wind projects we've been involved in Europe and across the Asia Pacific region as well. And that's across a multitude of work scopes, whether that's early phase engineering support, or whether that's lender's technical advisor for financial houses, or support through to operations as well. So I'll quickly just touch on some offshore wind capability and experience that Wood as an organisation has. So really we support throughout the full life cycle of offshore wind farm development, all the way through early phase development and design through to operation support as well. And that's for each of the individual components of an offshore wind farm. So from the onshore grid connection perspective, through the onshore substation, the export cable as well, the offshore substation and the actual wind farm itself. From an early phase development perspective, we undertake a lot of work in site selection and concept development pieces, as well as the early phase environmental permitting perspective, from environmental impact assessments, consent reports, environmental scoping reports, project design bases, etc. We also have our own in-house measurement LiDAR data called Galleon, which I can provide more information on. And we perform a lot of bank energy yield assessments, bank grade energy yield assessments, sorry. Taking that through to design, we're working on a large number of early phase developments in terms of early feed design and site selection activities and design assessments. In terms of technology assessments there, we've recently undertaken some internal research and development on floating wind technologies in terms of the whole design itself. We've undertaken a market assessment of all the available floater solutions, and using our experience transferred from the oil and gas industry, which I'll come on to later, we've undertaken a semi-quantitative assessment of each of those floater solutions with the intention of using that as part of our early phase technology selection for a variety of floating wind farm developers. Taking that through into build, we support clients and the owner's engineer perspective as effectively a delivery partner, supporting throughout offshore construction management, for example, offshore supervision, quality management, construction planning, and program management, either as an integrated project management team or as a owner's engineer / delivery partner. And we also support clients in later phases as well, so through operations, so for example, with asset management and any rectification works should they be required. Briefly touching on Wood Brazil, we have over 900 employees with offices in Rio de Janeiro and Macaé. We support across the oil and gas industry, so offshore operations and maintenance, topsides, subsea and export systems, drilling engineering and asset integrity management. Our clean energy offices also worked on a variety of renewable projects in Brazil, so mainly onshore PV plants and onshore wind farms, but the intention being that we'll be able to support the offshore wind industry as well. And you can see a high level description of some of the capabilities of Wood Brazil on the right hand side there. So briefly moving on to some example wind clients that Wood are currently supporting in offshore wind. This is very much a subset of our current client base. But the reason that I wanted to highlight these clients in particular is that I'm sure you'll be more than familiar with most of them, and that we can really see that the major oil and gas operators that we've traditionally supported in the legacy oil and gas business are transitioning into offshore wind development. They clearly want to be seen as energy suppliers and not just oil and gas companies, and that is the general trend of motion of these companies. And you can see the rebranding, for example, with Total Energies being wanted to see as that wider energy piece rather than just an oil and gas company. So as an example, all of the companies that you can see on screen here have applied to the latest ScotWind leasing round. So that's the leasing round for offshore wind farms off of Scotland. Some of these companies have decided to partner with dedicated or more niche offshore wind developers. So for example, BP are partnered with the MBW, ENI have partnered with Red Rock Power. Part of the reason for that is to gain experience with offshore wind, but some of it is purely due to the scale of some of these developments that are coming through in terms of sharing that risk and capex cost. But what we have seen is that the latest ScotWind round has put an equal weighting to oil and gas experience and offshore experience, which previously hadn't been the case. So previously, the renewables industry and ScotWind leasing rounds gave preference to pure wind farm developers. We're seeing a trend in the market in that, and that's reversing. So oil and gas operators are able to use their legacy experience and extensive experience in offshore working and working in the offshore environment to apply that to the offshore wind industry. So I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that we're seeing in the offshore wind industry and how these can correlate with effectively opportunities for the oil and gas industry in terms of transitioning over. So clearly there's an aspect of skills shortages there. So that could be either due to simple saturation of the market in terms of number of projects that are coming through. So for example, in Europe and particularly in the UK, we're seeing so many projects coming on board that there is effectively a skills shortage because of the demand for personnel with the capabilities and experience in offshore wind. That can be addressed by the oil and gas industry through retraining and transition of personnel over to renewables. And I'll come on to how we can transition those personnel in the next slide. I think Jose mentioned earlier around the lack of framework in countries that are developing offshore renewables industries. And it is the importance to have a clear set of legislation in place so that they can be understood by the market. And we think there's a chance for the oil and gas industry to help influence that with some of the lessons learned over the years in development of oil and gas facilities. And finally, the local content requirements. Obviously, there's a big drive towards local content when it comes to offshore renewables. It's obviously benefits to the project and the local area if you can increase that local content percentage. And there's an opportunity there for oil and gas in the industry, whether that's consultancies, whether that's the supply chain for oil and gas, or whether that's developers themselves, to really establish and expand that local presence, whether that's through early phase engineering support, or whether that's through increased local presence from fabrication yards, for example, so that fabrication is held locally and supporting the wider offshore renewables industry. So just moving on, so we wanted to quickly highlight some synergies between the oil and gas industry. Now, obviously there are niche engineering aspects that will be unique to the oil and gas industry and offshore wind. So flow assurance and drilling, for example, you're not going to see that in offshore wind, and conversely wind yield resource assessments, not really needed in oil and gas. But when it comes to the overlap between those two industries and the middle point of that Venn diagram effectively there, you can see that there are a lot of synergies between these two industries, and there is a significant opportunity for us to retrain personnel from oil and gas and move over to the offshore renewables industry. So just running through a few of those examples. So looking at the early phase site selection activities, for example, if you're thinking about an export cable route, the constraints mapping exercise and the engineering inputs required for that in terms of burial assessments and geotechnical investigations, looking at sand waves or boulder fields or unexploded ordnance. It's a similar process to what you would traditionally do for a pipeline routing than you would for an export cable route, for example. Then coming through to the design activities, looking at the foundations and structures, whether the foundations for the wind is a monopile or a jacket. Obviously, there's a significant amount of engineering design experience we can take from the oil and gas industry and transfer over. When it comes to floating wind, looking at the floater design, the naval architecture experience and the mooring analysis that we've previously undertaken in the oil and gas industry, directly applicable to floating wind solutions. And then that takes through into sort of the delivery of projects and the execution of projects in terms of the overall frameworks that have been put in place in terms of quality assessments and quality control, procurement support, supply chain analytics, package management, offshore supervision of heavy lifts and cable installations. It's very similar to umbilical installations in the oil and gas industry, and just applying that to high voltage cabling instead. All around the ports and infrastructure and operations and maintenance planning. These are all lessons learned that we can take from the oil and gas industry and apply to offshore wind by retraining personnel and getting them up to speed. And this is very much just a quick high-level summary of some of the synergies between the two. I mean, not even mentioning sort of geotechnical engineering or surveying, offshore HSE reps, for example, and then welding personnel, QAQC professionals, NDT, coating, installation managers. The list goes on. So really, we just wanted to highlight the fact that there is a significant synergy between two industries and a great opportunity for everyone. And finally, I just wanted to finish with a few case studies of not just where the oil and gas industry can support a blossoming offshore wind industry, but also how the offshore wind industry can conversely support the oil and gas industry. So here's a couple of examples of that. So starting on the left, we have the Hywind Tampen project. So this is the development of a floating wind farm to effectively electrify the offshore oil and gas assets, thereby reducing the carbon emissions associated from the gas turbine generators that are offshore. So Wood actually performed the FEED and the EPCI for all of the brownfield modifications on the two topside themselves. Obviously, there were significant challenges there in terms of the intermittency of the power supply from the floating wind farm itself, but Wood managed all the control systems around that and how to incorporate that power from the floating wind. And recently, the OGA and Crown Estate Scotland have announced the INTOG process in the UK. So similarly, that's looking at the potential for decarbonising upstream offshore oil and gas through the use of either floating or fixed wind and further electrification. The second point there is another internal research and development activity that would have undertaken in terms of repurposing offshore oil and gas assets that are potentially coming to the end of life. And similarly to the previous presentation there, talking about offshore electrolysis and a gridless wind farm. So this was effectively looking at the opportunity to put electrolyzers offshore for green hydrogen generation, utilizing offshore wind for that power generation, and then generating the hydrogen offshore, and then either using repurposing subsea storage for hydrogen storage, or repurposing offshore pipeline infrastructure to effectively transport that hydrogen back to shore, which could then be used for either industrial, domestic, or transportation uses. And finally, on the right there, we've got an example of a floating wind farm off island that we're working on at the moment, where we're undertaking early phase site layout assessments and inter-array cable analysis, looking at the routing of the export cable and inter-array cables, cable bearer assessments, cable motion envelopes, the dynamic cables, installation studies for those cables, looking at the technology review, as I mentioned earlier, and some of the MetOcean data review. So again, these are activities that we've traditionally executed for the oil and gas industry, and now very relevant and prevalent to the offshore renewables industry, and being used very successfully on those projects. So that was a very quick high-level run through of the presentation. Hopefully I've stuck exactly to the 15 minutes and brought us slightly back on time. So I'll pass back to Fabio now. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you so much. Very good presentation. And I hoped that Wood PLC makes a lot of business in Brazil in the future. It's already there, you know, but in offshore wind, I hope that you make a lot of business here. Really, was very impressed with the size of the knowledge that has been accumulated by the company over time, with all those projects in Europe, you know, the penetration in the market in Europe. So look, I would love to give you all the cues that came, you know, but we are pretty much ahead of time. Elbia and Jose, they had to go out, for one for emergency, other because of the time. And I'll just make one final question to all of you. I would like to have, if possible, your inputs on this. Before that, I just would like to highlight to the audience that we have in the chat, you know, the link to the website where we're going to have all the presentations, and then you can ask there. You can see there how the investment guide could be shared. So this is for the audience. Also, the speakers, I think that Megan gave, Solange, Elbia, if you did not, Stuart and Rose, and please post in the chat, there's still time, your email addresses for contact for any questions, right, please. You know, we had some questions such as, I'm going to read them very quickly, some of them, just a sample of them. One from H2 Ilian in Brazil for, I know it's about H2 projects, hydrogen project. Hydrogen, green hydrogen is quickly gaining traction as the energy vector of the future. It shows great synergies with offshore wind power, in which the UK is a global leader. Please elaborate on the stage of the projects which the UK is participating in Brazil. It's quite a good question. How's the UK doing in Brazil? Another one was about the download of the investor guide, and then it's going to be provided. Another one is about who are the major purchasers of maintenance and installation service involving ROPE, ROPE access, right? This is for Mr. Alexandre Romai, Alexander in Portuguese, Alexandre in Portuguese, Romai. And there are some other ones here about the areas with restriction for exploration in Brazil that have already been identified in the exclusive economic zone of the coasts. If these areas, these no-go areas have been identified. So this was my question, right? By the way, but there are some other ones. This is just a sample. Look, if you could just very quickly highlight your views on your knowledge of Brazil and South America. What are the key issues which you view to accelerate the development of offshore wind in Brazil? If you could just give one or two, and we make a panel of issues from the total inputs that you're going to give. So what are the key issues, the key topics to accelerate the development of offshore wind in Brazil? It's just more to focus on these issues now, because I know that you provided a number of them over the presentation. But now, who would like to start? Megan, you have the mic open.
For me, the number one thing, and it's the same for any country, is political stability. With that generally comes a position that you understand where your investment dollar is going to go. So the more long-term political stability there is, and whether that comes from a long-term regulation market or continuing auction processes or bidding processes, etc. As long as that political stability is there, usually private industry and finance will find its way to create quite a dynamic, vibrant industry.
Thank you so much. Long development cycle is, and you need stability. So who would like to go? I have now here Rose, Solange, Stuart. Who do we wish to go? Solange, maybe?
Yes, in my opinion, we need to understand and address the main challenges, the many topics we discussed, such as technical, infrastructure, regulation, environmental, and so on. And these are a great opportunity to debate this and summarize the questions in order to help investors and public and government in general. Thank you.
Yeah, people are working hard on this, isn't it, Solange? But there's still a lot to be done, isn't it, in Brazil, especially legislation, regulation. Thank you so much. Hey, Rose, would you like to go now, or Stuart?
Sure, I can chip in on this. I'll defer to the experts on the regulatory aspects and the technical aspects, but what I can say is that export credit agencies, we're here to help on emerging and developing markets. So this is the perfect time to be using ECA finance, because we can actually, those risks that you're mentioning, political risk, etc., we can come in and mitigate those and mean that it's more attractive to private investors. So let UKEF take the load and let the UK government take on the risk, and we'll be more than happy to.
Thank you very much, Rose. Stuart, over to you.
No, and I'll say to add to that, I mean, there's no shortage of willing developers and willing parties that are interested in offshore wind and looking to develop offshore wind farms themselves. So I think it is the case that the money's there, whether it's from private funding or whether it's from the likes of UKEF. It's just about giving that funding the confidence that there is the legislature in place to get these wind farms through and developed through the FID stages and further. So yeah, I think building on what Jose said earlier in terms of that auctioning round and the licensing agreements, the licensing, making sure that's in place to give people the confidence that they can put funding or capital at risk prior to a development, and then ultimately that they will get a return on that investment.
Thank you, sir. It would be a pity to miss such a great opportunity, isn't it, that we have in Brazil?
Exactly.
And now with COP26, everything is in favor of it. I hope that enterprise, I hope that Wood PLC, they make great business here in the future. So look, I'm closing this. Sorry, did I hear anybody?
Thank you.
Oh, I'm gonna thank you all now. Now is my thanking, Erin. I take gratitude and thanking very seriously here. So I thank all the speakers, Rose, Solange, Albia, Jose, Megan, Stuart. Really, thank you. Those were great presentations. I think that the picture is much clearer, I'm quite sure, here from many people that watched this workshop. Also, Tony Preston, from the UK government, Flavia Silva. Dear Flavia, thank you so much for inviting and supporting me in this moderation. Also, João, the DIT, and the British organizing and supporting teams here. So I think that we have an enlightening morning in Brazil. So the partnership I would like to thank this partnership between Britain and the British Consulate, in particular the DIT team, Renato Cordeiro. Thank you very much. This partnership has been increasingly strengthened, as perhaps never historically. That's going to be good for Britain. It's going to be good for the UK government. It's going to be good for everyone, for business in general. And well, I'll always finish in these difficult times with these words. More than, I don't know, tens of webinars I've been moderating with these words. For all of you guys, the speakers, everyone watching, be well and healthy, you and yours, internally first and externally. Thank you so much. Have a great year end, all of you, and 2022 and beyond. Take care of yourselves.